Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're located, and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Jack Himes, and I am a program manager for the Recycling Market Center. I will serve as the moderator today. We would like to extend a special thanks to Bob Hollis of the Mobius Network for providing the webinar management software for this series, and Lisa Ruggiero of the National Recycling Coalition for providing technical support. Today's webinar focus is on e-scrap legislation in the United States. We have two excellent presenters today, Jason Linnell and Walter Alcorn. Following their presentations, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box located in the control panel of your screen. You may also use the dialog box to request assistance if you are experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. Please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on the National Recycling Coalition and the PA Recycling Market Center websites. And now I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Jason Linnell, the co-founder and executive director of the National Center for Electronics Recycling, NCER. Jason leads and directs all daily activities of the NCER, including research on electronics recycling data and policy, as well as management of the Electronics Recycling Coordination Clearinghouse, ERCC. Under Jason's direction, the NCER manages and oversees a statewide network of collectors and recyclers for the Oregon State Contractor Program. Prior to forming the NCER in 2005, Jason served in the Environmental Affairs Department for the Electronic Industries Alliance, a trade association for electronics manufacturers and suppliers. At the EIA, Jason led industry negotiations on electronics recycling policy efforts and helped develop the industry's first comprehensive consumer education initiative on electronics recycling options. And now I will hand the program over to Jason.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks to the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center and NRC for hosting this webinar and for asking me to give an overview of the U.S. e-scrap laws. I'm going to set the stage, tell you a little bit about what the 25 different state laws are about, and give you a few ways to think about how to group them, since there are very many laws, and talk about some of the key trends that we're seeing now that we do have 25 in effect. Very briefly, Jack talked a little bit about this in my bio, but the NCER, we are a nonprofit organization based in Parkersburg, and we work on many different aspects of the electronics recycling issues, mainly focused on research and running programs. And you'll hear a little bit more about the ERCC effort towards the end of my presentation here. This is what the U.S. looks like when you are just focusing on U.S. e-scrap laws and you want to see which ones are included and which ones are not. So this map in orange shows you the ones that have some type of electronics recycling program law. And the next slide tells you a little bit about how it came to be that we did have 25. And I just want to say that there are some different ways that people are counting the different state laws. Some people say 24, some people say 26. But my standard that we use for NCER purposes is whether the law sets up a program, and that is why we have included these 25 states that you're seeing here listed by year in which they passed. So it all began with the state of California, and slowly we had one state per year leading up until 2007, when we just had an enormous number of states pass new laws in both 2007 and 2008. And since then, we've had somewhat of a slowing down between 2009 and 2011. And last year, in 2012, there was one law that did pass, but we did not add it to this list because it did not set up a program for electronic recycling. So as you can see, when you total them all together, we have 2/3 of the country, 66% of the population is covered by one of these laws, and we have half of the states, 25 states, covered by these laws as well. That other state that I mentioned that did pass a law in 2012 was Colorado, and you'll see that listed here on a separate map that we keep, that is states with landfill bans. So these are the states that say, even from households, certain types of electronic devices cannot be disposed of in your regular trash and cannot go into landfills. And the ones that you see highlighted in dark red are the ones that have landfill bans that are in effect, including the most recent one, which was Pennsylvania. That came into effect as of late January of this year. And the ones that are in yellow have not yet come into effect. Colorado will come into effect later this year. And Arkansas may actually never come into effect, even though we list them there because of conditions put on the regulation. And finally, New York State is in a staged landfill ban and is in the middle of that transition, and it will be fully in effect by 2015. So all in all, these are 20 states now that have some type of landfill ban on electronic devices. And in some cases, these are states that do not have the program laws. And two examples are in the Northeast. Both New Hampshire and Massachusetts are states that do not have program laws and are not included in that list of 25 states that I pointed out earlier. Now, you may have heard that there is a patchwork of state laws, and that definitely is a term that does apply to what we have in the 25 states. And the reason for that is that there are many different ways they look at electronics recycling and how the programs are being set up. The first key difference is in the area of products and what is covered and what is not. And when you look at all the states combined and try to say what is covered everywhere, there are really only two types of products that are covered everywhere in all states, and those are monitors and laptops. After that, we have some combination of TVs, computers, and printers are the most common devices, and then a few states cover other ancillary electronic devices like keyboards, mice, small servers, personal audio, VCR, and DVD players, cable and satellite boxes. But in the middle, the most states cover some combination of what I call the big five, the TVs, desktop computers, laptop computers, monitors, and printers. And those definitions are now enabling states to cover things that are being newly introduced into the market over the last couple of years, like tablets, e-readers, and some other devices with some type of display. But all in all, we have a number of products that are covered among the different states. And this is different if you look at how electronic recycling programs operate in different countries and around the world. We, for instance, don't include some of the large white goods, lighting, toys, some of those other devices that sometimes get considered to be electronic waste in other countries are usually not covered under these laws in the United States. The second key difference is in who can access the recycling system, and in many cases it's the free recycling system. In all cases, the 25 laws cover households or consumers, depending on how you define that, but regular households that have old electronic items. But then several states go beyond households and have inclusions on small businesses, and sometimes it's defined as those with fewer than 10 or 50 or 100 employees. Some states add schools to that list, either just K through 12 or all types of schools. And then on down the line here, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and the rarest states, there's only a couple that have everybody covered, and that would be all large businesses, institutions, government agencies. Really anyone and everyone can take part in the system. But at a minimum, the states cover households and devices originating from households. Another key difference area is in how the programs are financed. Where does the funding come from to pay for the collection, transportation, and recycling of old electronics? And we have many different variations here. The first state that passed any law, as you saw on the previous slide, was California, and they have an advanced recycling fee where there is a fee charged at the time of sale that goes into a state fund. There are no other states that copied that model. After that, there were variations on producer responsibility, and you'll see different variations here that I have described, and these are how they divide up the costs among the producers or the manufacturers of used electronics Some just have a fee that the manufacturers have to pay, or they can run their own program. Some charge the manufacturers based on their return share, which is how much of your brands are appearing in the waste stream today as they're being collected. And then some charge based on market share. So how much are you selling today based on a percentage, based on the weight that you're putting into the market, or some combination thereof. And then we have some states that have divided up their system between certain products having a return share allocation, certain products having a market share allocation. And then finally, there's a catch-all category where the financing is not specified in the law, but manufacturers have to set up and run their own programs to meet the requirements under the law and figure out how they are going to finance those programs. So those are some of the differences, and when you look at the similarities, I come up with 5 different models, I call them, for how you can think about the different states. And I'll talk about a little bit about these different models in a minute here. But as you can see, there are what I call the pounds sold or share states listed there. The second category is called default and opt-out. The third I call limited take-back programs. The fourth is called state recycler approval, and the last one is that advanced recycling fee. So under the first model, pounds sold or share, each manufacturer or OEM has an individual pounds goal based on their sales, and they can then go and get those pounds wherever they can find them throughout the state. In some cases, there are incentives for going to rural areas. You get a 1.5 pound credit for every pound that you collect. And as a recycler under these programs, your job is to go and get a contract with either a single manufacturer or a group of manufacturers and then work with those collectors. Now, there are some differences among the programs on whether they have convenience goals or geographic goals or whether they require a plan. But in general, that's the idea around these laws, is to go out and meet a pounds target based on your pounds sold or the share of an overall statewide per capita target. The second model I call default and opt-out, and that is a program where the state sets up one default program that all manufacturers are in unless they choose and are approved to operate an opt-out program. So that what this means in practice is that there are a small number of collective programs that are out there that service a network of statewide collection locations. And usually there are convenience goals associated with these laws where you have to have one collection location in every city of over 10,000 people or in every county. And that means that there are, again, a small number of collective programs that are operating out there. In the case of Vermont and Washington, there's only one program that operates under the state, and all manufacturers participate through that program. And again, as a recycler, they have to win contracts with these collectives, and then either the managers of the programs or recyclers go out and contract with collectors. There are some differences even within these groups of states, mainly on the return share and market share allocations, and whether or not they set an actual collection goal to be met by all the programs. The third model is the limited take-back states, and these are the states where there is no funding mechanism specified. The manufacturers have to choose the plan type that meets the requirements of the law, and in some cases the manufacturers are allowed to just operate a mail-back program, and that suffices with the requirements of the law. And in other cases, the manufacturers do actually have to go out and set up some collection locations, especially for the larger devices, since mail-back is not possible, and actually meet some pounds goals that may be set within the law, depending on which state you're operating in. Again, usually there are no pounds goals, however, at least in the initial states that pass these types of laws. That just the manufacturers report annually on what was collected under their programs and report that to the state. Again, the recyclers that want to operate in these systems, they contract with individual or groups of manufacturers and then have to meet all the reporting requirements that are included under there to satisfy the law. And there are some differences here. Obviously, there's a number of different types of limited take-back programs that I have covered. And in some cases, the initial laws that passed in these states, like Missouri and Virginia and Oklahoma, that should say, TVs were not covered under these laws and are still not covered today. The fourth, producer responsibility model, so these first 4 have been all producer responsibility, is where the recycler submits an application to the state agency, the state approves those recyclers, and then they can go out and service the collectors. So in contrast to some of the other laws that I mentioned before, the 3 other models, the recycler does not have to contract directly with the manufacturers or win contracts with groups of manufacturers. They are, once they're approved, they are allowed to bill all the covered manufacturers, and there's different ways they allocate the costs. But there's only 2 states that do this, and those are Connecticut and Maine, and they do have some differences amongst each other in terms of product scope that's covered and how they divide up return and market share among those products. But generally, there are no collection goals in either of these 2 states. It's whatever is collected, the costs are passed along to the manufacturers based on the allocation set by the law. And then finally, the last model, the advanced recycling fee, that is, as I mentioned, California is the only case that does this, and it's a fee charged on sales. The state pays a standard rate for collection and recycling, and that is, again, no manufacturer involvement directly in the running of the collection and recycling system, but there is a fee charged on new sales to cover the costs of the recycling system. So how are they doing? There are some results now. We have more and more data every year. Still, we don't have data for every state, all 25 states, but we do have several states that have at least 3 years worth of data, and those are the ones that you're seeing on this slide here on a per capita basis. And that disclaimer that you see there should be definitely taken into account. You cannot compare a value in one state to a value in another state, even on a per capita basis, without taking into account all those differences I mentioned up in the front about the products that are covered, the entities that you can collect from, and any other differences that would shed some context on the numbers that you see here. But when looked at against the results year to year, year over year, you can see here with some trends with some of the states basically holding steady. California in the 5 to 5.5 per capita range. Maine getting to that range now. Minnesota is in the high 6 per capita range. And Washington and Oregon have been between 6 and 7, with Oregon getting closer to 7 pounds per capita collected for the year. We have a few other states with data, like Illinois, closer to 3 pounds per capita. Wisconsin, which really jumped from the first, which was not a full year, the first year up from 4 pounds to over 6 pounds per capita. And then we have a little bit of data from both Rhode Island and Indiana, but not actually from 2012 as of yet. And they're both in the 4 pound per capita range now as of the latest data. Then these limited take-back states, as you can see, when you don't have TVs, it does have an impact on the numbers on the per capita basis. So Texas, Virginia, and Missouri, the numbers in Texas do not include TVs because they were just added this year, but they're all below 1 pound per capita. Michigan and West Virginia do have TVs included and are over 1 pound or over 2 pounds per capita, but they're again one of the limited take-back states. And then finally, on the data side, some newer states where we have just 1 or maybe 2 years worth of data. Connecticut, you can see here at 2. North Carolina getting over 4 now. New Jersey over 5. New York State was 3 in their first year, and then the highest per capita value that we've seen so far is in the state of Vermont, which is at 7.7 pounds per capita for 2012. And just finally, a few key issues that are coming up that are being discussed and happen every day in these programs as you look at them across the country are things like products and how they're changing. We all see new products coming onto the market, and that definitely has an impact on the managers and the manufacturers and the recyclers that are trying to fit them under these state recycling programs. The definitions that were written 4 or 5 years ago don't always apply to the new products coming on the market today. So things like e-readers, media tablets, what are now being introduced as phablets, which are phones which the display of around 7 inches, those are challenging the state laws, and that takes time to figure out whether they should or are included under the state laws. Another issue has to do with the targets. There are targets in the pounds, and there's a sort of a push and pull of these when you look at the different actors that are trying to meet the targets and trying to meet their budget obligations. Regulators want results. They want to see that the targets are achieved or surpassed. Recyclers want more pounds entering their facilities, so they're always on the lookout for more volume coming to them. But manufacturers who are in charge of paying for a lot of these systems under producer responsibility, they do want to comply. They do want to show that they're having results in pounds that are being collected, but more pounds equals more costs under these programs, the way the recycling industry is set up today. And the final issue is collection. We're starting to see, or we have seen, some issues where what we call leakage is happening from collection sites where there may be some outside the system that pay more than what the regulated programs pay, and therefore valuable items are diverted and they don't end up coming to those recyclers that have met all the qualifications under the law and are engaged by manufacturers. And what we've tried to do on this is one thing that we do under ERCC, which is best management practices based collectors, and there's a document on our website, and the website is listed at the end. And just briefly on ERCC, it's a group where we have state agencies that are implementing programs, and as members of the organization, they're the voting members, and then any other group can be an affiliate member, and we try to work collectively on solving joint challenges, exchanging information. So this collector best practices was definitely something where we could share information and set a baseline of best practices. We try to reduce administrative overlap and coordinate data gathering and information sharing. And one thing that we've talked about doing and we are starting to do now is do more outreach and have joint but non-binding responses on key implementation issues. And recently have been sending out letters to manufacturers who are non-compliant in 2 or more states, trying to get them to step up and fulfill the obligations they have and create a level playing field for everyone. And as I mentioned, the collection site best practices, it is a document that sort of sets the baseline for what collection sites should be doing. It has good practices on how to stack and wrap different types of products, what you should be looking for at facility maintenance, and then where to send the material so that you're making sure that all the devices collected under a state program are going along to certified recyclers that can handle that material. And this is all available on the ERCC website. Finally, just on the conclusions, what we see going forward, we still have 25. We've had 25 states since 2011. We don't know when we'll have number 26. There are some states that have active legislation that Walter will talk about here in a minute for 2013. But in my mind, it's fewer than what we've had in the past, fewer new states with the potential to add to that number of 25. But we are seeing more industry programs, more voluntary programs on the collection side, and things like what Walter will talk about with the E-Cycling Leadership Initiative. There's always a question of why we have all these 25 state laws. Let's just have Congress come in and set a national baseline, and why don't we have a federal program? But that's very unlikely. Definitely in the short term, maybe even the medium term. We have a lot of states that are trying out programs, and there really isn't the political will right now to do something in Congress, and it takes a lot to get the attention of Congress on an issue, even though it is something that's very important to all of us within the electronic recycling world. Congress will likely have an export bill that will restrict certain exports that will be introduced, like it was in the last Congress, but whether it moves is still an open question. And then finally, more data is always good to see with the results of changes in policies and how things are actually working. And we'll have more of that. At least most states will have 2 years of results that we can compare their performance and see how things are going. And we're trying to help out in standardizing some of the metrics to help compare performance across the state despite all the differences that we have. And one thing that definitely a lot of people are looking at is whether we should just be looking at pounds or how we can look at other measures of performance to see what is actually happening under these state programs. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention. The websites listed there are for NCER, which is electronicrecycling.org. The one that has the collector best practices is ecycleclearinghouse.org listed there. And then we also, under that organization, run a manufacturer multi-state registration website called eCycle Registration. That's also available with the link right there. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Jason. Very good presentation. I'd like to remind the audience at this time, many of you are already submitting questions, and that's great. But if you would, please type in any questions in your control box. We will get to them after our next presenter is done. Our next presenter is Walter Alcorn. Walter is Vice President of Environmental Affairs and Industry Sustainability for the Consumer Electronics Association, CEA. The U.S. Trade Association, representing more than 2,000 consumer electronics companies, and the owner and producer of the continent's largest annual trade show, the International CES, which I believe is the Consumer Electronics Show. Mr. Alcorn is responsible for legislative initiatives impacting electronic product recycling, design, eco-labeling, and hazardous materials restrictions. He currently coordinates CEA's e-cycling leadership initiative and the associated billion-pound challenge announced in April of 2011. I'll now turn it over to Walter Alcorn.
Jack, thank you very much. As Jack mentioned, I'm with the Consumer Electronics Association. We represent more than 2,000 companies in this industry. We do have a pretty diverse membership of not just manufacturers, but also retailers, distributors, and other service providers in the industry. So let me just step back a little bit and frame up, I think, some of the issues that have driven legislation before we get into some of the details. And Jason, thank you very much for your excellent presentation on the existing state laws. That's a great foundation to work from. Just to remind everybody what, when we talk about e-waste, what it is that's driving a lot of the discussion and a lot of the action. First of all, we have a lot of us have seen, and some very active NGOs have showed improper disposal in developing countries. That's definitely a concern. On the flip side, there is significant resource potential in old electronics, and that's something certainly as an industry that we recognize. This is a priority. It's also a major challenge to re-aggregate, if you will, these electronic products once they've been distributed into virtually every household in the United States. And the other thing which a lot of times we forget about as we go through these discussions, these are products that are owned by others. They're owned by consumers, and it requires action, affirmative action on the part of consumers to actually recycle these products and these devices. And then the last bullet in terms of, I guess, the legislative background is perhaps one of the more important ones, which is we do see in many parts of the country, state and local governments looking to industry for help and in some cases to solve the electronics recycling challenge. So I won't go into much detail here. Jason did a good job setting this up, but there is a patchwork. I agree, 25 states is the number that I use as well. And just a couple things from an industry's perspective that are worth noting, that no two states are the same, that there are groupings of states with similar programs, but they're all independent and they all operate their own programs. And just here's an example of the registration fees that manufacturers have to pay. And actually this is a simplified example because in some of these states it's actually more complicated than what's shown even in this graphic. But these fees, these registration fees are typically they go towards the administration of the recycling, oversight of the recycling program, and in a few states they go towards actual collection or promotion, but in many cases in most cases actually these dollars just go for administrative purposes. But as you can see, there is a variation here, and behind each one of these registration fees is a form. And there are also reporting forms that go along with most of these states as well, and the reporting forms are all different. So it's a challenge. This creates some compliance challenge for manufacturers. Just a couple other points on the legislative history before we get to current time. I would point out, I point to something called the NEPSI initiative, as the end of that is really when state action, state mandates began to be passed. NEPSI stands for the National Electronic Products Stewardship Initiative. This was something that EPA, US EPA got started back, well, over 10 years ago now. When that stopped, I think a number of state and local officials gave up on trying to get a national program, and since then we've seen the state laws pass in now 25 states. And as Jason pointed out, there really was a burst of activity between 2007 and 2010, and since then the expansion of state laws has slowed. But I would point out that there have been a couple of new state laws, Utah and then Texas specifically for televisions. They already had a law for computer equipment, but for televisions there was a new law passed there in the last couple of years, and those were both passed with industry support. We're tracking bills across the states actively, included here not just the electronics recycling bills or e-waste bills, but also just showing some of the other bills that in some cases actually overlap with or intersect with electronics recycling in some case. We've been watching 25 different bills, 25 different states with legislation, 25 e-waste bills specifically, 12 extended producer responsibility bills, and then 19 bills focusing on toxic chemicals and other related, I would call it extended producer responsibility type issues. I think everyone on the call is probably aware and understands what I mean by extended producer responsibility, but basically the idea here is once a manufacturer has made a product and sells it, it's not completely absolved of all responsibility, and the idea is that at the end of that product's life, the manufacturer has a responsibility to help facilitate or to recycle it. And some of the bills, these 12 extended producer responsibility bills, are more broad than just the electronics industry, but could potentially include the consumer electronics industry. We have seen 6 bills die in committee so far. 3 bills have passed, a couple of studies, and then a bill, one bill that focused on just state government e-waste generation. So this gives you just a list of the e-waste and EPR bills that are out there, which ones are still active. And I would note too that there is I would say a growing diversity of bills relating to this topic. I think as different programs have been implemented and different ideas have been developed on what could be put into these laws, I think we're seeing more and more ideas showing up in legislation. Just to distinguish a little bit in what we're seeing in the legislation right now, or in the legislative activity, new states, these are states that don't have an electronics recycling law right now. You can see there's 7 of them that are listed there that did have or do have legislation this year. But then the rest of the 16 states, 9 of them, are states where there's already a law on the books. Some of us call that churn. So it's so once a state passes an e-waste law, oftentimes that's not the end of it. That the law is reviewed. Sometimes it's updated. Proposals, at least, to update it are quite common. And I think really what this shows is we're still in very much a phase of ongoing experimentation at the state level with this legislation. So just these bill types will look familiar. They very much they're very similar to, I think, some of the programs and state laws that Jason mentioned, but target bills, so bills where there's a pounds target. We're seeing e-waste bills like that. We're seeing some e-waste bills where there are collection convenience standards written into the law or written into the legislation. We have some legislation where there's a requirement to have a recycling plan. A manufacturer has to have a recycling plan, but maybe not much more than that in terms of specifying what's required. And then there are combinations of the above in legislation. So you know, pick one or two and throw them together, and I can probably show you a state where that legislation is under consideration. Also, I call the Maine type bills. We're seeing a couple of those being submitted. Connecticut, of course, has a law similar to Maine's, but Maine came first. And we're also seeing a number of bills this year relating to landfill bans, requirements that different entities use third-party certified recyclers. And the very new thing this year, we've seen bills in 3 states that will require big box retailers to take back electronics for recycling. Now those laws were introduced in Texas, Oklahoma, and Wyoming, and none of them have advanced at this point. I would just give you a little bit more background on our industry and what our industry is doing on the recycling front. We do have an initiative, a national initiative called the E-Cycling Leadership Initiative. We announced it a couple of years ago. We have with that a billion-pound challenge. We're trying to increase our industry's recycling to 1 billion pounds annually by 2016. And we are focused on not just the quantity, but also quality, responsible recycling, and also increasing the opportunities for consumers to recycle electronics. We're up to about 8,000 permanent or ongoing collection sites that are sponsored or operated by our consumer electronics industry. And then we have an excellent zip code locator. So if you go to www.greenergadgets.org, you can type in your zip code and look for nearby opportunities to recycle your electronics. The collection infrastructure is improving, but there's obviously still more work to be done. One of the other things that Jason had mentioned too that I think is important is the metrics. We're talking about some of the metrics in terms of collection locations, talked about our billion-pound challenge, but also the awareness of collection opportunities we found is a very important metric. We do consumer surveys. CEA does a consumer survey every other year, and one of the questions we ask is if people know where they can recycle electronics. And in 2010, 58% knew where they could recycle their old electronics. That's up to 63% last year. It is increasing. We'd like to see that trend continue because certainly if people don't know where they can recycle, they're not going to recycle. And in terms of other progress that we're making towards our long-term goals, we'll be actually issuing our second annual report next week. In 2011, we were up to 460 million pounds of consumer electronics recycled, and we'll be releasing new numbers on that next week. Just a couple challenges I want to mention that is definitely things are in play as you look at this issue. I believe collection still remains, it's our biggest challenge. It has been, I think, from day one, at least on the consumer electronic side. Also, as Jason mentioned with the evolution in products, we really do see a significant change not only in the technologies that are being used, but in the material content of the recycling stream. And this very much impacts the economics on the back end and the markets for recycled consumer electronics. And our biggest challenge right now is CRT glass. Cathode ray tube glass. This is a technology that was used for decades, but stopped being used and stopped being sold in any significant numbers during the past decade. And now the use of the old CRT glass is more and more up in the air in terms of what kind of uses might be available for that. And so while CRTs have become more difficult and more expensive to recycle, other types of materials have actually, the markets have improved. So we are seeing a little bit of a divergence there. And these do have some interesting policy implications in terms of when a law might be needed and how that law might be structured. So just for us, again, I represent the consumer electronics industry. So for us, our priorities, we do believe that a national approach is critical. I agree with Jason that Congress is not going to do anything in the near term, but we are looking to move this from a state-by-state approach to a national approach. That's why we're doing the National E-Cycling Leadership Initiative. And we're also very much trying to move this from a compliance issue into companies' business models. We think over the long term that's how this activity is really going to take off and be sustainable is when it's part of their business. And along those lines, we also are looking for an industry-led approach. And again, with our initiative, that's one of the things we're hoping to help demonstrate. So that's my presentation, and look forward to answering any questions with Jason.
Thank you, Walter. Very fine presentation also. We're now going to field some questions that were sent in by attendees. And again, if you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar dialog box in your control panel, and we'll answer as many of your questions as we have time for. The first question I recall came in when Jason was giving his presentation, so we'll let Jason have the first crack at this one. Would you say that California has ended up being more on the right track with its ARF program in light of the current problems with CRT stockpiling? ?
So I think I understand the question. I guess the thought behind it is that because it's not a producer responsibility program, somehow it has not contributed as much to the issue of stockpiling of CRTs, which Walter did mention. There was a New York Times article that came out last month about the issue of stockpiling CRTs, and the background behind it was that because recyclers have taken on CRT products but then not been willing or able to send the glass to downstream markets where they can be processed for either lead smelting or glass-to-glass recycling or some new technology, that they've just been sitting on the glass and therefore creating warehouses of used CRT glass, either in whole form or broken form. And I tend to think that this is a problem that's not specific to one type of model over the other. It's something that can happen in a state that doesn't have a recycling law at all. Certainly some of the targets that are out there that manufacturers and therefore then recyclers are looking at and saying they need to meet, and therefore they're maybe willing to take on more CRT glass than they would otherwise without that target there or without the backing of the state law. May have contributed to it, but it's an issue that impacts anybody that's taking on CRT glass and needs to have an appropriate outlet and the funding to get it to the right places. So I don't think that California is necessarily in a better situation on that. There's still a lot of glass that needs to move there, and California has made an amendment to their regulations to allow for hazardous waste disposal of leaded glass and for disposal of regular glass if it's been processed in a certain way into regular municipal solid waste landfills. So there's issues everywhere, and I don't think it can be limited to one type of model over the other.
Thanks, Jason. Walter, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, Jack, and thanks for giving Jason the question first. Yeah, this is tough. Apart from California, I think what we're seeing with CRT glass is a strain that's emblematic of a decline in the market. The demand for CRT glass is declining, and I think that's been, so that's showing up in a number of different ways. Frankly, at CEA, we're trying to get more information on what is going on out there. There's been some research to date, and we're doing some of our own research, and I think there's still more to be known on how things are developing out there and what's going on. But I think one thing that we can all say for sure is that the demand for CRT glass is declining, and that is having ripple effects up through really all the recycling programs.
Thanks, Walter. There were several comments that came in about the bottom of some of Jason's slides were cut off, so you couldn't see the state associated with each bar graph. And those full slides will be available on the NRC website, the RMC website within about a week. And also Jason offered to personally email them out to people if you make a request to him.
Yes, and Jack, we can also put that on the ERCC website, so we'll put it there too.
Yes. Thank you, Jason. All right, next question is directed to Jason, who mentioned there are different ways to count states with electronic laws. I was wondering if he has information on Utah's law and can discuss why NCER includes it in their list. It seems like that one is up for debate.
Yeah, that's the one that I've seen where some people have left it off the list and tried to call it an education bill. But in looking at it and looking at actually what is happening under the law, there are programs that are being set up. There are manufacturers that are engaging local collectors and setting up new programs that weren't there before the law passed, and that is all being collected under the, I forget what the name of it is, but there is a program that's established under the law. So in our mind, it does set up a program. There are programs actively happening, and it should be included in the 25 list of 25. So I think there's some that view it as just an education plan and say that manufacturers only really have to set up education about a recycling program and can direct people to a different recycling program that they don't actually operate. But I don't think that's really what is happening in practice.
Okay, thanks, Jason.
Yeah, I can, Jack, I concur with Jason on that, and I know there's some people that think that unless it's spelled out exactly in the law how things are going to work, it's not real. But you know, if folks have question about Utah, that and they know somebody, or check with Utah DEQ or Salt Lake County or Deseret Industries or any of the stakeholders that are active in the program that the manufacturing industry is working with there.
Okay, the next question we'll give to Walter first. Do you see a national free recycling system for consumers in the future? Are manufacturers in favor of it?
Yeah, actually, I would argue that one already exists. If you go to any of the Best Buy stores, any of the 1,000 or so around the country, you get free recycling. You can take old. You don't have to have bought it at Best Buy. It doesn't matter what the brand is, but you can bring back almost any consumer electronic device that you can carry into the store, and they recycle it for free. That's actually an excellent example of how a company has integrated recycling into their business model, and they're doing it in states where there's no law. They're doing it in states where there is a law, and that's the type of thing that we're encouraging. The 8,000 or so collection sites that are available on Greener Gadgets. Those are, I don't believe we have any in there right now that still charge. I think if there are, it's a small fraction. So I think the real question is there going to be ultimately a national mandate that it develop that way and be operated that way? I'm not sure, but we're not waiting for the law. We're trying to move ahead and demonstrate how it would work operationally and just do it.
Jason?
Yeah, and if the question is there going to be a mandate for a national free program, then that's obviously there's a different answer to that, and I think we both said we don't see that happening, at least from Congress in the near term. There would have to be a lot of things that would happen and a lot of issues you'd have to solve in terms of what do you do with the 25 states that do have programs? How do they operate under a national framework? Are they grandfathered in, or are they preempted and the new program comes into effect? It's a messy issue when you look at it from the perspective of what has happened in the last 10 years and how we go forward with a national program. So you're more likely to see things like what Walter talked about with more industry programs going on in those states that don't have the laws, and then maybe some coordination and some harmonization of the details of the other state laws now once we have more data on how things are happening and see what some of the best practices are.
Okay, the next question was directed to Jason, who said that manufacturers are non-compliant in 2 or more states and that ERCC is sending them letters in this regard. Can Jason explain in what regard they're non-compliant and what the states are asking them to do?
Yes, in many cases it's just a simple registration that has not been filled out, but in a lot of cases too, it's both the registration, which entails a fee, as Walter pointed out in that slide that showed what some of the fee levels are, and then also setting up a program or being part of a collective program. And there's a list of about 10 to 15 manufacturers that are non-compliant in at least 2 states. Some of them are non-compliant in at least 5, 6, 7, or even 8 states where they sell a product. It's available online. You can find it on many different websites on their own website, but they have not gone to the steps of filling out the registration form, telling the state how they're going to set up a recycling program, or working with a collective or individual or recycler to actually have a recycling program to take responsibility for their devices. So none of them are big name brands. They're mainly smaller. A lot of them are overseas, but many of their competitors have stepped up and are fulfilling the requirements of the law, and we're trying to create a level playing field for everyone by informing them of their requirements and then directing them to the state program managers to make sure they're in compliance.
Yeah, and Jack, I would just add, Jason did a good job of explaining how that works. That we completely support compliance with all of these laws, and it is very much at the margins. I don't know from a market basis, but maybe I would think that 98 or 99% of the market is compliant in terms of manufacturer compliance, particularly on the television product line. It is dominated by a fairly small number of companies that manufacture these products, although that is somewhat changing. There are new entrants that come into the market. Some of them don't have much, if any, presence in the U.S., and sometimes it is difficult to reach those. But we definitely hope to see all the manufacturers getting into compliance.
Okay, thank you. The next question, either one or both can answer. What research data do we have, and what research data do you believe we need in order to develop sound U.S. e-waste export policies?
Wow, that's a great question. Jason, do you want to take a first cut at that? You've been involved in some of the research.
Yeah, actually there's a lot happening just right now on solving that data challenge, because it is a challenge to find out what is actually going out of the country, and then how we're going to collect the data, and then how we can make that repeatable going forward so that we can measure changes over time. My organization, we're involved in a project with MIT. It's under a grant from EPA using this group that's called Solving the E-Waste Problem. It's an international group that is working on a lot of the challenges across the world with all of these issues that go on. And one of the components of that is working with EPA to try to get better data on electronic recycling exports. And it's a challenge because there's so many actors that are involved in the system, whether it's recyclers, brokers, sometimes even just the collectors that are trying to get things overseas. And on the actual data side, there's many different ways you could classify it according to some of the trade codes that are used. In some cases, it's unintentional. In some cases, it's intentionally put into the wrong category, and therefore it's hard to track down as a researcher to find out what is actually going out of the country and at what level. But we're slowly getting more data. We're developing some models to make it so that there could be some more hard data going forward as part of the work that we're doing with MIT, and that's happening right now. There was just a study that was put out by the U.S. International Trade Council just within the last month or so, where they actually had a mandatory survey of collectors, brokers, recyclers. They could cast a pretty wide net, and your response was required by law to tell them how much was going out and broke it down into several categories. And they just released that report, and you can find it on the USITC website. It has some really interesting numbers about what is being refurbished, sent out as refurbished, what is going out as commodity materials, and you can see some of the breakdowns there. it's something that we're trying to look at and then expand upon with the work we're doing, and trying to look at actually within product categories, what level do we think is the used value for what things are going out, and then compile some data. And we'll have some results from that, from one of the phases of that, over the next couple of months to release to the public from our work. So we still need more data. We need a better way to capture the data, and we need more people to be aware of how they should be recording and capturing their exports. But there's also a challenge of just getting people to report the results truthfully, because some people are afraid of the stigma around exports and therefore try to hide things. And then just getting people to report the correct numbers as they're sending things out into the country.
Okay, thanks. The next question was directed to Jason. What is the breakdown of cost in percentage for collection, transportation, and processing, and is it the same across the country?
The second question is easy. No, it is wildly different across the country. There are different rates that we see for recyclers in the Northeast versus the Northwest, and different rates that are paid in California versus other parts of the country. So there is some variation. On the collection side, it can vary from zero. There's not a payment to the collector, or traditionally in a lot of states, when the initial collection programs were set up, the collector was a local government that was actually paying for the costs or charging a fee to residents as they drop off their old material, so they could have a program. But these rates, because as I showed in a lot of the models, it's up to an individual recycler to contract with a manufacturer or group of manufacturers. Those are all private business transactions. We really don't know what is being paid, what are the common rates, and just what the ultimate breakdown of the costs are. But they are different, and there are a few states where we do know the rates. For instance, California is usually acknowledged on the high side as having a 39 cents per pound rate that's paid out to collectors and recyclers for all the costs. And then there's some other states that have reported some results that are lower than that, and there's some approved recycler rates in in Connecticut and in Maine that you can see. But it does vary across the country, and there's very little data in some states because it's all private business.
Okay, thanks. Next question was directed to Jason, but I think either one of the presenters may have input. If you were given the responsibility to design a most ideal state or national program, which structure would you like to develop after learning the pros and cons of the current state legislations? Is the program implemented in Connecticut and Maine a better one from a recycler's perspective, as the recyclers can be paid reasonable fees for recycling CRT glass?
Wow, Walter, that'll be
yeah.
This is an interesting.
If you want me to jump in with this,
I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure I could say there's one particular one that is would be the model. Again, as I said, I think there's still a lot of experimentation going on. We're involved. We're in the middle of that as an industry. We're trying to figure out which model would work best. But I have to say that the last question is ironic, or last part of the question, because it is true that the costs are higher in programs like in Maine and Connecticut because of the lack of market forces. There's not really competition amongst the recyclers on what prices they charge, so they do charge more. The irony is, about a year and a half ago, I was first alerted to the CRT stockpiling problem in one of those states, and actually walked through a couple of big warehouses of CRTs that had been stockpiled, specifically because of the material coming through one of those programs that was in violation. So again, like Jason said earlier, I don't think you can say that one type of financing system or another, whether it's California or Maine or or any of the others, I think it's dangerous to say that there's a true cause and effect there. I think it is there are differences in terms of how the effect of the market slowdown is affecting these different programs, but I don't think you can make a direct cause and effect relationship between the financing model and CRT stockpiling.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
guess the only thing I'll add on that is that I personally don't think we have the ideal model out there yet, and we're still learning some things. But we did have a workshop last year at the eScrap conference. ERCC hosted a workshop, and we had panels of recyclers and manufacturers and state governments talking about what some of the lessons they've learned, and then talking about this question of an ideal system. And we do have some notes from that on our website about what some of the common results were. And it was at a high level, but we had some common feedback about setting the ground rules and then letting some of the systems develop in a flexible way underneath that, and having everyone have some challenging but achievable goals to meet, and then reporting back on those results and having a level playing field. So it's more at the level of where can we all agree on some of the basics of what the program should look like, rather than looking at the individual models that are out there right now and saying this is the ideal system, as we still do have some things to learn, and different perspectives will come from the different stakeholders about which system seems to work best right now.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and you guys have done a wonderful job of answering some very tough questions. Now I've got a couple of softballs for you, at least I hope they are. And this can be answered by either or both. Are any states proposing a ARF law, an ARF law?
Walter? Yeah.
Well, just one, and Jason, you know the state, but I don't think, my understanding is that bill is not going anywhere. It may have died by this point. I mean, the political history here, just for those that aren't aware, after California passed the advanced recycling fee in 2003, where retailers collect the fee and then remit it onto the state, there was sort of a miniature retailer revolt, and retailers got organized politically, and the next 24 states that passed e-waste laws didn't have the ARF. I don't think that political dynamic has changed at this point. I'd be surprised if we do see the ARF come back, although I don't know, stranger things have happened. There are definitely there's a lot of change going on in this industry, and as people learn and revise some of their thinking on this thing, you never know, but I don't see it happen anytime soon.
Okay, next question.
Right, yeah, I think the state was West Virginia, and it never went anywhere. It's been introduced a couple of times, but it doesn't go anywhere, and now the session's ended.
Okay, Jason may have this one. Can you summarize which states have programs that require eSteward or R2 certification?
Off the top of my head, well, Jack, you're in one in Pennsylvania.
Right.
That is one state that does require it. I think Vermont does at some level require R2 or eStewards, but there are some exceptions to that. The Colorado bill that passed last year requires R2 or eStewards for state government agency material to be directed to those types of recyclers. And there are some other states where it's sort of a de facto requirement, but it's not explicit. There are some requirements that are there spelled out in the law, but they don't say exactly R2 or eStewards. They have their own state standards that are very similar to R2 and eStewards. So if you're meeting those certifications, you will also meet the state requirements with some slight modifications. Did I miss any, Walter? Or are those the ones that you can think of as well?
Well, I know Mississippi just passed a law very much like Colorado, but it's only state government e-waste generated, has to go to third-party certified facilities. And I'm pretty sure South Carolina has third-party certification requirements. I'm pretty sure that's right. I may be wrong, but
right. And keep in mind, both R2 and eStewards first became available in about 2010. If you look at the list, a lot of the states were passed before 2010. Although those certifications, those standards were in development certainly before then, but they really couldn't be pointed to in law or in regulations for a lot of those states that passed before that time.
Okay, we have time for one more question. And this one is directed at Walter, but Jason, if you want to comment on it, feel free. CEA has done commendable work seeking out new end-use markets and technologies for CRT glass. Does Walter see continued investment in end-use markets by manufacturers in the future?
Yes, and thanks for that question. I should have mentioned the CRT challenge that we did last year as a group, a crowdsourcing effort to try to find new applications and technologies for CRT glass. We did that with the Environmental Defense Fund. This one we're doing with ISRI, the Recycler Trade Association. We're doing a second phase of that. I think so. I mean, for better or worse, our industry, we're right in the middle of this. We're having to pay attention to these markets, for recycling markets, for the glass from our products that we haven't sold for 10 years, but because it is coming into the recycling stream, because of extended producer responsibility, because of these laws, because of the voluntary activities that we're doing as an industry and what these companies are doing to get to recycle old consumer electronics. For all those reasons, yes, we are looking at how we can support new uses for CRT glass, and frankly find solutions for long-term solutions for CRT glass. And just as an aside, this is one of the things that makes this challenging from a business standpoint is we are going to peak in terms of the CRT glass coming into the recycling stream during the next maybe 2 or 3 years, something like that. And then there'll be another 10 years or so of CRT glass coming in, but it's going to decline. So that's one of our challenges, is we do have an issue where we have a time-limited supply, yet we have an increasing amount and need to have good solutions found to it. So yeah, we'll keep working on it. And frankly, we really hope others keep working on it too.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add on to that is that through ERCC, we have been putting together the collection of thoughts and questions about this issue, about CRT stockpiling and how it relates to the current rules in effect and the state laws and landfill bans, and sending that in letters to EPA, and have sent a couple letters, and we know that they're working on pulling together some information to help get everyone sort of on an even level of knowledge about what can and cannot happen with CRT glass in the states, what the rules are, where can it go, and what if it's separated, what can happen here, what are the limits on accumulation. And so we hope to see that coming out soon. But there's been, from our group, from the state agency, and then the manufacturers and recyclers involved in ERCC, there's definitely been a need. They have stressed the need to have more EPA action and information on this issue, and that's led to some of the letters that we've sent.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to give a special thanks to our audience. You're a big audience, and you've hung in there very well, and we appreciate your questions. All the questions will be passed on to the presenters. And Walter and Jason, I wish to thank both of you for your very fine presentations and hanging in there with a few of the tough questions, but we really appreciate all the work you did here today in this hour and 15 minutes.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Jack.
Yep, thank you. This webinar, like all webinars in this series, has been recorded and will be available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. Thank you and goodbye.